Many experts say we live in a golden age of violin making. More craftsmen are making more violins to the highest standards than at any time in history. And one violin maker, considered to be among the world's best and another Macarthur Award winner, lives and works right here in metropolitan Detroit. The day we visited Joseph Curtin at his studio, a young University of Michigan violinist, Marie-Elise McNeely, arrived to try one of his beautifully crafted instruments. Many of his violins are in the hands of some of the most distinguished artists of our time.
It's a real high to hear a great performer playing your instrument.
In honoring Joseph, the Macarthur folks wrote, "Driven by a desire to experiment and innovate, Curtin builds distinctive violins of enduring quality that are increasingly recognized worldwide as instruments of the highest order." Along with three small friends, Joseph lives with his wife, Jessie Richards, a singer and songwriter, on 5.5 acres outside Ann Arbor. In his studio, just a few steps from their house, he mostly works alone.
I found I love having 6 hours alone in an empty room to do my stuff.
He takes about 2 months to build an instrument. And if you think he probably made model airplanes as a kid, you're almost right.
Not model airplanes, I wanted to make real ones. I was completely crazy about science and designing things and trying to make things.
Born and raised in Toronto, he crossed the Atlantic with his family at age 10 to live in London. His father was a photographer, his mother a painter, and the household was not musically inclined. But at school, Joseph made a crucial choice.
There was this sign-up sheet posted on the wall and said, "Would you like to play a musical instrument?" And I don't know, I'd never ever thought of playing a musical instrument, but for some reason I just signed up under violin. I have absolutely no reason why I did that.
Young Joseph fell in love with playing the violin. And back in Toronto, through high school and 2 years of college, he thought it would be his career. And then
I went to a master class with one of the best violinists in Canada, most sought-after teachers, and he told me to quit, and that was completely devastating, completely devastating.
Joseph was 19. He worked odd jobs and took classes in philosophy and literature. Eventually, he began studying the violin again and thought about buying one. He called a new violin maker in town, a Hungarian named Otto Erdős.
I called up and asked him how much his instruments cost, and he grumbled, "Better we don't talk about money on the phone," or something like that. "Come on over."
If Otto had talked money, it would have ended there. But when Joseph arrived, Otto's wife announced he should play the viola and offered to give him lessons. For 2 years, he took the lessons, but he also watched Otto make violins and finally decided to ask if he could be an apprentice.
The very day I was going to ask him, he turned to me and said, "Joe, you should be a violin maker."
Joseph would work with Otto for several years, but he knew very quickly that making violins was exactly the right thing for him to do.
It was probably the one job I can think of that really brought together music, visual arts, science, design, trying to make things. So it was probably the best piece of luck in my life.
In workshops in Italy, where 300 years ago Antonio Stradivari made violins that would become legendary, Joseph met another young violin maker, Greg Alf. The two decided to go into business together. Touring the U.S., they looked for a place to settle and finally decided on Ann Arbor. Great violinists often came through the town, and the university was a center for violin acoustics research. Joseph was soon collaborating with top researchers in the field.
I found that most of my intuitive ideas about how the violin worked were wrong, were dead wrong. But every time I realized why, then it opened up a new door.
One of the enduring mysteries is why some of the old instruments produce a sound that is so difficult to match.
What I think it comes down to is the materials, what happens to wood over time, and that's one of the most important questions that science has to answer, and it's something that I'm quite determined to work on.
After 12 successful years with Greg Alf, Joseph decided to go his own way. And in recent years, he's spent more time and energy on experimenting with new materials and innovative design ideas. After sampling wood in many parts of the world, he settled on Engelmann spruce from Washington State and British Columbia. But he's also intrigued with the possibilities of graphite fiber.
So I've spent some years making tops and backs using wood and graphite laminates, and very promising.
It's been said that a violin is the perfect instrument.
I think that's said more often by dealers and makers than by players who have to deal with the imperfections of their particular instruments. And in fact, I've never met a player who thought they had a perfect instrument.
So Joseph has been experimenting with design innovations. Yes, this instrument is a violin, but it lacks those fancy corners on the traditional instrument. With vigorous playing, they sometimes get damaged. So, for ergonomic reasons, he wondered if different might be better.
The player knocks them off, you glue them back on, the player knocks them off. At what point do you say, maybe they shouldn't be there in their traditional form?
In a craft where makers jealously guard their secrets, Joseph writes and publishes articles about his.
I think we live in a different age now. I think anything I know today was going to be on the internet next week, so I might as well say it and get some kind of credit for it.
And it may well be that the MacArthur Foundation noticed him because of his writing.
I'm sitting there varnishing and the phone rings and this fellow says, I'm from the MacArthur Foundation. Fortunately, my wife was home, so we could jump up and down and scream.
The money, says Joseph, means more time to pursue his research and innovation.
I see learning an awful lot about how to make better violins and doing some experimental instruments I would never have been able to do before. And then hopefully by the end of it, I will be that much further ahead as a maker and as a person.